The glass shattered against my cheek before I even saw it leave her hand. Blood dripped onto my mother's white tablecloth. My sister Emily stood across from me, chest-heaving eyes, blazing with a rage I'd never understood. "You need to learn your place," she hissed. 20 people at that dinner table. My parents, my aunts, my cousins. Not one of them moved. Not one of them asked if I was okay. Mom's only words, "Emily's just stressed about her wedding." I pressed a napkin to my face and said nothing. I drove home in silence, cleaned the wound alone, and stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, a thin red line splitting my cheek like a fault line. That night, I made a decision. The next morning, I woke up early and started cooking. A full feast, Emily's favorite dishes. When she walked in and saw the spread, she laughed. "Finally, you've learned your place." She had no idea that the man standing behind her, the one about to place his hand on her shoulder, would change everything. Have you ever smiled at someone, knowing exactly what was coming? My name is Courtney Adams. I'm 35 years old, and I've spent the last decade building a career as a financial consultant. I've helped companies restructure their debt-guided families through bankruptcy and saved businesses from collapse. I'm good at what I do. But to my own family, I've always been invisible. Growing up, I was the quiet one, the responsible one, the daughter who never caused problems and therefore never got attention. My younger sister Emily was different. 3 years younger, twice as loud, and somehow always at the center of every room she entered. Emily had a gift for making people feel like she was the only person who mattered. Our parents adored her. They called her spirited when she threw tantrums and passionate when she demanded things. When I achieved something, they nodded politely. When Emily achieved anything at all, they celebrated like she'd won the Nobel Prize. I used to think it was just how families worked. Some children shine brighter, some children fade into the background. I accepted my role because I believed that eventually, if I was good enough, patient enough, present enough, they would see me. I was wrong. It started becoming clear to me a few years ago during one of our regular family dinners. Emily had just changed jobs, a lateral move with the same salary, and Mom spent 20 minutes praising her amazing career growth. Then she turned to me and asked almost as an afterthought how work was going. I told her I'd just helped a manufacturing company avoid bankruptcy, saving 300 jobs in the process. Mom smiled thinly and said, "That's nice, dear." Then she turned back to Emily to ask about wedding planning. But what really unsettled me wasn't the favoritism. It was something Emily said later that night, in front of everyone with a sweet smile on her face. "I always have to remind Courtney to call Mom," she announced. "She gets so busy she forgets about family." I froze. I call our mother every single Sunday. I have for years. I never miss. But when I looked around the table, I saw everyone nodding along like Emily was stating an obvious truth. Even Mom looked at me with mild disappointment, as if confirming what she already believed. That was when I realized something was very wrong. The family's version of me didn't match who I actually was, and somehow Emily was the one writing the story. Still, I said nothing. I kept showing up. I kept calling. I kept being the daughter I'd always been hoping they would eventually see the truth. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a Saturday, exactly 1 week before Mom's 60th birthday party. The whole family had gathered for dinner, and Emily made an announcement. She and her fiancé Marcus needed a bigger place after the wedding. She turned to me with that familiar sweet smile and said I should give them my apartment. After all, I lived alone. I didn't need all that space. When I politely declined, her mask slipped. The sweetness vanished. Her face twisted into something I'd never seen before, raw and ugly and full of rage. I didn't expect what came next. Afterward, alone in my apartment, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror and stared at the wound on my cheek. Blood had dried along the edges. The cut was deep enough to scar. My phone buzzed. A text from Aunt Linda, my mother's younger sister, the only person who ever seemed to see me clearly. "Are you okay? I heard what happened. I've always seen you, even when they didn't." I set the phone down and looked at my reflection, the exhaustion in my eyes, the resignation, the years of silence etched into my face. Next Saturday was Mom's birthday. The whole extended family would be there. And I made a decision. For 3 years, I had protected my sister's secrets. For 2 years, I had quietly gathered evidence of her crimes, not because I wanted revenge, but because I kept hoping she would stop on her own. She never did. And I didn't know the worst part yet. I didn't know that Emily hadn't just stolen my money. She had been stealing my place in this family for over a decade. Monday morning, I sat in a small conference room across from David Mitchell, a lawyer I knew through my work in financial consulting. We had collaborated on several corporate restructuring cases over the years, and I trusted him. More importantly, I knew he would be honest with me, even if the truth was hard to hear. I slid a thick folder across the table toward him. Inside was everything I had been collecting for the past 2 years: bank statements, credit reports, screenshots, tax documents, a timeline I had pieced together during late nights when I couldn't sleep. David opened the folder and began reading. His expression shifted as he turned each page. What started as professional curiosity became something darker: concern, then disbelief. Finally, he looked up at me with the kind of expression I had been dreading. "Courtney," he said slowly, "this isn't just fraud. This is a pattern of deliberate exploitation. Your sister didn't make a mistake. She targeted you." I had known that somewhere deep down, but hearing someone else say it out loud made it real in a way I wasn't prepared for. I asked him to keep reading. I needed him to understand the full picture before I explained what I wanted to do. The story began 3 years ago on a night I will never forget. It was past midnight when my phone rang. Emily was sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. She told me she was in trouble, serious trouble. She owed $15,000 to an online gambling site. She had been hiding the addiction for months, betting small amounts at first, then larger ones, chasing losses until she was buried. Marcus didn't know. Our parents didn't know. If anyone found out, she said her life would be over. Marcus would leave her. Mom and Dad would be devastated. She begged me to help her. She said I was the only person she could trust. I didn't hesitate. I transferred the money the next day. I didn't tell our parents. I didn't lecture her. I didn't ask for anything in return. I just wanted to help my sister. She promised me with tears still in her voice that she would never gamble again. She said she had learned her lesson. She said she would pay me back someday when she was back on her feet. I told her not to worry about it. Family helps family. That's what I believed. What I didn't understand then was why she had called me instead of our parents. Mom and Dad had money. They would have helped her in a heartbeat. But they also would have asked questions. They would have wanted explanations. They might have told Marcus. They might have held her accountable. Emily didn't want accountability. She wanted a quiet solution with no consequences. And she knew I would give her exactly that. I wasn't chosen because she trusted me. I was chosen because I could be used without resistance. 6 months after I paid off her debt, I received a strange notice in the mail. A credit card company was informing me that my account was 60 days past due. The problem was I had never opened an account with that company. I called them immediately, and they confirmed that a card had been opened in my name 8 months earlier. The balance was over $12,000. I was confused. I thought it was identity theft by a stranger, something that happens to people all the time. I filed a dispute and tried to move on. Then another notice came. A different card. Another balance I didn't recognize, then a third. I started digging deeper, pulling my credit reports, tracing the accounts back to their origins. The applications had been submitted online using my social security number, my date of birth, and my home address. The cards had been sent to a P.O. box I had never heard of. But when I traced the payments, I found something that made my stomach turn. Some of the charges matched purchases I had seen Emily make. A designer handbag she claimed was a gift from Marcus. A weekend trip she said she won in a contest. Jewelry she wore to family dinners. I didn't want to believe it. I spent weeks trying to find another explanation, but the evidence kept pointing in the same direction. Emily had obtained my social security number years earlier when she offered to help me fill out insurance paperwork after I moved to a new apartment. I had trusted her completely. I never imagined she would use that information against me. But she did. She opened 3 credit cards in my name, racking up a total of $47,000 in debt. She also filed fraudulent tax returns listing me as a dependent, even though I hadn't lived with our parents in over a decade, just to collect refund checks that should have been mine. David asked me why I hadn't acted sooner. It was a fair question. I had known about this for 2 years. I told him the truth. I kept hoping she would stop. I kept hoping she would come to me, confess, and apologize. I kept hoping the sister I thought I knew was still in there somewhere. I didn't want to destroy my family over money. I thought maybe if I just waited, she would do the right thing on her own. Then she threw a glass at my face, and I finally understood. The sister I was waiting for didn't exist. Maybe she never had. I showed David one last piece of evidence, a screenshot of a text message Emily had sent to a friend 2 years ago. It said, "Courtney's too busy and too naive to ever check her credit. She'll never know." David read it twice, then shook his head. "This wasn't desperation," he said. "She chose you deliberately. She knew exactly what she was doing." As the week went on and I prepared for Saturday, I found myself thinking about more than just the money. Memories kept surfacing, small moments that hadn't made sense at the time. Mom once told me I never called her anymore, but I called every Sunday. Dad mentioned that I had skipped his birthday dinner 2 years ago, but I was there. I brought the cake. Why did my family have such a distorted picture of who I was? Why did they always seem to believe things about me that weren't true? I didn't have answers yet. But I was starting to see a pattern that went far deeper than credit card fraud. On Thursday evening, I called Emily. I kept my voice light and casual, as if the wound on my cheek had already healed. I asked if she needed help with Mom's birthday party. She sounded surprised that I wasn't still angry. "Just bring a salad or something," she said dismissively. "That's about your level anyway." I smiled to myself alone in my apartment. "Don't worry," I told her. "I'll bring something memorable." Saturday arrived. I put on my best dress. I covered the scar on my cheek with makeup, not because I was ashamed, but because I wasn't ready for questions yet. When I walked into my parents' house, the first thing I heard was Emily's voice, bright and confident, telling a cousin across the room, "I practically had to drag Courtney here today. You know how she is. Family is never her priority." I stood in the doorway watching her lie about me in real time, and a single thought filled my mind. How many lies had she told when I wasn't in the room? How many years had she been doing this? Today everyone would find out. The living room was already crowded when I stepped inside. About 20 relatives had gathered for Mom's 60th birthday, filling the space with conversation and laughter. I scanned the room and found Emily at the center, exactly where she always was. She wore a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than my monthly utilities, and she was showing off her engagement ring to a circle of admirers. Her smile was radiant. Her voice carried across the room as she told stories about wedding planning, about Marcus, about how perfect everything was going to be. Mom stood beside her, beaming with pride. When a distant aunt arrived, Mom guided her straight to Emily. "This is Emily," she said, her voice warm with affection. "My pride and joy." The aunt smiled and complimented Emily on her ring, her dress, her glow. No one looked in my direction. I found a quiet spot near the window where Aunt Linda was sitting. She squeezed my hand when I sat down beside her. "How are you holding up?" she asked softly. I told her I was fine. I wasn't sure if that was true, but I needed to stay calm. I needed to wait for the right moment. From across the room, I watched Emily move through the crowd like she owned it. At one point, she drifted toward my cousin Rachel and leaned in close, gesturing in my direction. I couldn't hear everything, but I caught enough. "She almost didn't come today, you know. I had to call her 3 times this morning to make sure she'd show up. Family just isn't her priority." Rachel nodded sympathetically, glancing my way with what looked like disappointment. I had arrived 2 hours early that morning. I helped Mom arrange chairs. I set out plates and napkins. I asked if there was anything else I could do. Emily had seen me. She knew exactly when I arrived. And yet here she was telling Rachel the opposite, painting me as the reluctant daughter who had to be begged to attend. She was lying about me in real time, right in front of everyone. I filed that away. It would matter later. Before the party went any further, I walked over to my mother. I had something for her. Something I had spent 3 nights writing. It was a handwritten letter, 3 pages long, expressing everything I had never been able to say out loud. I told her I loved her. I thanked her for the childhood memories that still meant something to me. I told her I hoped we could be closer someday, that I had never stopped wanting her to see me. I handed her the envelope and watched her open it. Mom read the first page standing up. By the second page, she had to sit down. Tears formed in her eyes. When she finished, she looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. "Courtney," she whispered, "this is beautiful. I didn't know you felt—" She couldn't finish the sentence. She was too overwhelmed. Across the room, I saw Emily watching. Her smile had vanished. She looked irritated, maybe even threatened that the attention had shifted away from her, even for a moment. I didn't care. That letter wasn't about winning. It was about telling the truth. And soon there would be more truth than anyone in this room was prepared for. The party continued. Conversations resumed. But something had shifted. Mom kept glancing at the letter in her hands, and Emily kept glancing at Mom. I could feel the tension building, even if no one else noticed. Then Emily made her move. She raised her voice so the whole room could hear. "Well, at least I actually contribute to this family," she announced, looking directly at me. "Courtney, what have you ever really done for anyone?" The room went quiet. Everyone turned to look at us. Emily stood there with her chin lifted, waiting for me to shrink back into silence the way I always had. But not today. I stood up slowly. My voice was calm. "What have I done?" I repeated. "I paid off your $15,000 gambling debt 3 years ago, Emily, so Marcus wouldn't find out, so you could keep your perfect engagement." The silence that followed was absolute. Emily's face went white. I saw Marcus across the room, his expression frozen in confusion. I continued. "I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder I had brought, and I've spent 2 years documenting this. I laid the evidence out on the coffee table in front of everyone. Credit card statements for accounts I never opened, bank records showing charges I never made, tax documents with my name and social security number used to file false returns, a complete timeline of theft stretching back over 2 years." David stepped forward. I had introduced him earlier as a friend from work, but now his role became clear. His voice was measured and professional. "I've reviewed these documents thoroughly," he said. "Opening credit accounts using another person's identity, filing false tax returns in their name, these actions could constitute federal offenses: identity theft, tax fraud. If Courtney chooses to report this to the FTC and IRS, Emily would likely face a criminal investigation." Emily's voice cracked. "I was going to pay it back," she stammered. "I just needed more time." I looked at her without flinching. "You had 3 years. Instead of paying it back, you opened more cards. You stole more money. You filed another false tax return just last April." Mom was still holding my letter. Her hands were shaking. She looked from the letter to the documents on the table, and I could see the devastation spreading across her face. One daughter had poured love onto paper. The other had been stealing in the shadows. The contrast was impossible to ignore. I turned back to Emily. "I paid your debts. I kept your secrets. I protected your relationship with Marcus. And you repaid me by destroying my credit, putting my name on fraudulent tax documents, and letting me take the blame from banks and the IRS for things I never did." Emily collapsed into a chair, mascara running down her cheeks. "I was jealous," she sobbed. "You always made everything look so easy. I couldn't stand it." I felt something shift inside me. Not sympathy, something colder. "If you had told me you were struggling, I would have helped you, again. But you didn't ask for help. You just took, and you never stopped." The room was heavy with shock. No one moved. No one spoke. I thought the worst was over. I thought the identity theft was the whole story. Then Rachel spoke up. Her voice cut through the silence like a knife. "Emily," she said slowly. "When Courtney walked in today, I watched her help your mom arrange chairs for an hour before any guests arrived. She was here before anyone else." Rachel paused, her eyes narrowing. "So why did you tell me 30 minutes ago that you had to beg her to come, that family isn't her priority?" The room went still again, but this time the silence felt different, heavier, more dangerous. Emily opened her mouth, but no words came out. She had no answer. Because there was no answer. She had been caught lying in real time in front of witnesses about something everyone could verify. And in that moment, I realized something that made my stomach turn. The money she stole from me was only part of what she had taken. The real theft had been going on much, much longer. Rachel's question hung in the air like smoke. Emily stammered, grasping for words. I must have been confused. I didn't mean it like that." But even as she spoke, I could see no one believed her. The mask had slipped too far to put back on. Rachel wasn't finished. Her eyes narrowed, as if she was sifting through old memories, pulling them into the light one by one. Actually, Emily, she said slowly. Last Thanksgiving, you told me Courtney did not come because family dinners were beneath her. Those were your exact words. You said she thought she was too good for us. Rachel paused, her voice hardening. But I just heard Aunt Linda mention that Courtney was in the hospital with pneumonia that entire week. Every head in the room turned toward Aunt Linda. She had been sitting quietly in the corner, watching everything unfold. Now she nodded, her expression heavy with something between sadness and vindication. It's true, she said. I visited Courtney in the hospital on Thanksgiving Day. She had an IV in her arm and could barely breathe. She was devastated about missing dinner. She asked me to send her love to everyone. Aunt Linda looked directly at Emily. I assumed you passed that message along. Did you? Emily said nothing. Her silence was its own answer. Then another voice spoke up. My cousin Michael, who had coordinated the arrangements for our grandmother's funeral 2 years ago, stepped forward. Wait, he said, confusion spreading across his face. Emily, you told me Courtney refused to contribute to Grandma's funeral. You said she didn't pay a single dime. You made it sound like she didn't care enough to help. He shook his head slowly. But I handled all the payments with the florist. I saw the records myself. Courtney paid for half the flowers. Her name was right there on the invoice. The accusations began layering on top of each other like debris rising to the surface after a flood. Small lies, casual distortions, offhand comments that had quietly poisoned how everyone saw me for years. I stood there watching it happen, feeling something strange wash over me. It wasn't satisfaction exactly. It was more like relief. The truth was finally breathing. Aunt Linda spoke again, her voice heavier now. There's something else, she said. When your father had surgery 3 years ago, and Emily volunteered to coordinate all the family visits. She was supposed to let everyone know the details. She turned to look at me, then back at the room. She gave Courtney the wrong hospital and the wrong date. Courtney called me in tears, thinking she had missed everything. She thought her father had gone through surgery without her there. I remembered that day vividly. I had driven to 3 different hospitals trying to find him. By the time I realized what had happened, visiting hours were over. I spent that night alone in my apartment, convinced I was the worst daughter in the world. Aunt Linda continued. I asked Emily about it later. She said it was an accident. A simple mix-up. She paused. But I always wondered. If Courtney had shown up on time, she would have been at her father's bedside, and Emily wouldn't have been the only devoted daughter in the room. The silence that followed was unbearable. Mom stood frozen still, clutching my handwritten letter in one hand. Her voice came out as a whisper. Emily, how many times did you lie to us about your sister? Emily had no answer. For once in her life, the woman who always had the perfect words was completely silent. I looked across the room and saw Marcus standing near the door. Not my cousin Michael. Emily's fiancé. The man she was supposed to marry in 3 months. His face was pale, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles straining. He had been silent throughout everything, but now he stepped forward, his voice shaking with barely controlled anger. You gambled away thousands of dollars, he said, staring at Emily like he was seeing her for the first time. You stole from your own sister. You committed fraud in her name, and you've been lying to your family for years. He took a breath, steadying himself. You told me Courtney was cold, jealous, difficult. You said she resented you for being closer to your parents. I believed you. I treated her like she was the problem. He shook his head slowly. I treated her like she was the problem, Emily, because of what you told me. Emily reached for him, desperation breaking through her voice. Marcus, please. I can explain everything. Just give me a chance to explain. Marcus stepped back out of her reach. Without a word, he took her left hand and slid the engagement ring off her finger. He held it for a moment, looking at it like it belonged to a stranger. I don't know who you are, he said quietly, but I know I can't marry someone I can't trust. He turned and walked out the front door without looking back. Emily let out a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob. Her perfect wedding, the one she had been planning for over a year, the one she had talked about at every family gathering, dissolved in front of 20 witnesses. Dad finally spoke. His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. We signed some of those papers, he said, looking at the documents still spread across the coffee table. Emily said they were for insurance. She said it was just routine paperwork. I looked at him. You didn't read them, I said. You just signed because Emily asked, like you always do. Mom was crying openly now, tears streaming down her face. Courtney, we thought you didn't care about us. Emily always explained why you couldn't come to things, why you didn't call, why you seemed so distant. We believed her because we didn't know any better. I felt the weight of 35 years pressing down on my chest. Mom, I called you every Sunday. I came to every holiday I could. I paid for things you never knew about. But every time I showed up, Emily had already told you a story about why I wasn't good enough, why I didn't really love you, why I was the cold one, the selfish one, the daughter who didn't care. My voice was steady, but I could feel the emotion threatening to break through. And you believed her, every single time. You never once picked up the phone to ask me if her version was true. The silence that followed was suffocating. I could see the realization spreading across their faces. They weren't villains. They had been manipulated just like everyone else, but they had also chosen not to verify. They had chosen to believe the easier story, and that was their failure. They were only now beginning to see it. I turned to Emily one final time. She was slumped in her chair, makeup ruined, dress wrinkled, looking smaller than I had ever seen her. I'm not sending you to jail, I said, but you will repay every dollar, every single cent. You will file amended tax returns and deal with the IRS penalties yourself, and you will get real help for your addiction. I paused, letting the words sink in. Those are my conditions for not reporting you to federal authorities. This is the only chance you're going to get. Then I turned to my parents. I love you. I always have. But I can't keep being the daughter you only see through Emily's lies. If you want me in your life, you need to see me. The real me, not the version she invented. I took a breath. If you can't do that, I'll survive. Because I finally have myself. I walked toward the door. Aunt Linda rose and followed me. At the threshold, I turned back one last time. I'm not asking you to choose between me and Emily. I'm just asking you to look at both of us with clear eyes, for the first time. Then I stepped outside into the evening air. Aunt Linda walked beside me to my car. The noise of the party faded behind us, replaced by the quiet sounds of the neighborhood at dusk. She squeezed my hand and said softly, I'm proud of you. I should have spoken up years ago. I looked back at the house. Warm lights glowed through the windows. Shadows moved behind the curtains. A family rearranging itself around a truth they could no longer ignore. For the first time in 35 years, I wasn't running away. I was walking toward something I had lost a long time ago, myself. 6 weeks passed. The autumn air grew cooler, and the leaves outside my window turned shades of gold and red. I had moved to a new apartment on the other side of the city. It was smaller than my old place, but it felt bigger somehow. Brighter. The living room had large windows that let in the morning sun, and there was a small balcony overlooking a quiet neighborhood park where children played in the afternoons and elderly couples walked their dogs in the evenings. The scar on my cheek had faded to a thin silver line. I used to flinch every time I caught sight of it in the mirror. Now I didn't bother covering it with makeup anymore. It had become something different to me, a reminder. That was the last time I let anyone hurt me without consequence. My consulting business was doing better than ever. Referrals started coming in faster than I could handle. I restructured my schedule, hired a part-time assistant, and for the first time in my career, I started saying no to projects that didn't feel right. I used to take every job that came my way, afraid that turning anything down meant I wasn't working hard enough. Now I understood that protecting my time wasn't laziness. It was survival. Every morning I woke up early and made myself a cup of coffee. I carried it out to the balcony and read books I had been meaning to get to for years. I never used to make time for reading. I was always too busy being everyone's invisible safety net solving problems that weren't mine. Now I was learning something I should have learned decades ago. Taking up space isn't selfish. It's necessary. Emily's consequences came swiftly and completely. She signed a formal repayment agreement for all $47,000 to be paid in monthly installments over 5 years. The interest and penalties were hers to carry. She also had to file amended tax returns with the IRS, correcting the fraudulent filings she had made in my name. The refunds she had stolen, plus the fines, came out of her own pocket. The process took months and left her financially devastated. As part of our agreement, and the only reason I didn't file a federal report, Emily enrolled in a gambling addiction treatment program. It wasn't court-ordered. It was my condition. She had a choice: get real help or face a criminal investigation. She chose help. I don't know if she's actually committed to recovery or just going through the motions. That's not my problem anymore. I gave her one chance. What she does with it is up to her. Marcus never came back. The wedding was canceled. All those deposits, all those plans, all of those dreams Emily had talked about at every family gathering, gone in a single afternoon. She quit her job a few weeks later. She wasn't fired, but word had spread through family networks. Too many people knew the truth now. For the first time in her life, Emily had to build something real. No one to exploit. No sister to steal from. Just herself and the mess she had made. I filed an identity theft affidavit with the IRS and reported the fraud to all 3 credit bureaus. It took months of paperwork and phone calls. There were moments when I wanted to give up, but I kept going. And slowly my credit score started recovering. The accounts Emily had opened in my name were removed from my record. My financial identity, the one she had stolen, was finally becoming mine again. 3 weeks after the party, my phone rang. It was Dad. His voice sounded rough and uncertain. "I've been thinking," he said slowly, "about all the times Emily explained why you weren't there, why you didn't call, why you didn't care." He paused for a long moment. "I never once asked you. I just believed her. I'm sorry, Courtney. I don't know how to fix 35 years, but I want to try." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to tell him it was okay that I forgave him, but I wasn't ready for that. I told him I appreciated him calling. I told him I needed time. He said he understood. A week later, a handwritten letter arrived in my mailbox. I recognized my mother's handwriting on the envelope. It was the first letter she had ever written to me. "I've been replaying memories, chérie," she wrote. "Every time Emily told me you didn't call, you forgot you didn't care. I believed her without question. I never picked up the phone to check. That's on me. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking if I can learn to know you, the real you, not the version I was told." I read the letter twice. I didn't respond immediately. I wasn't rushing forgiveness. I had spent 35 years waiting for my family to see me. I could take my time deciding whether to let them back in. I told both my parents the same thing eventually. "I'll stay in your lives, but only if you see me as I am, not as Emily described. If you slip back into old patterns, I'll be okay, because I finally have what matters most, myself." On a quiet Sunday afternoon, Aunt Linda came to visit my new apartment. We cooked dinner together, nothing fancy, pasta with garlic bread. We opened a bottle of wine and carried our glasses out to the balcony as the sun began to set. Linda looked out at the park below and asked me something I had been asking myself. "Do you ever regret doing it that way in front of everyone?" I thought about the question, the chaos of that afternoon, the tears, the family I had blown apart with the truth. "No," I said finally. Because for the first time in my life, everyone heard my voice. Not Emily's version of me, mine. I spent 35 years being narrated by someone else. That day I finally told my own story. Linda smiled and squeezed my hand. We sat together in comfortable silence, watching the last light fade from the sky. A few days later, my phone buzzed with a text from an unexpected number. It was Marcus, Emily's ex-fiancé. "Courtney, I owe you an apology. I spent years believing Emily's version of you. I treated you like you were the difficult one. I was wrong. You deserve better from all of us." I read the message twice. I smiled. I didn't reply. But for the first time in a long time, I felt something I had almost forgotten was possible. I felt seen. The evening light spilled across my balcony as I sat with a book in my lap. My phone rang, a new client referral. I answered with a voice that was warm and steady and entirely my own. "Courtney Adams speaking. How can I help you?" For 35 years, I believed that to be loved by my family, I had to be quiet, invisible, small. I thought if I was patient enough, good enough, silent enough, they would eventually see me. But silence didn't bring me love. It only brought me invisibility. And invisibility gave my sister the space to rewrite my story, to tell them who I was before I ever got the chance. If you're listening to this and you've been the quiet one in your family, the one who shows up but never gets seen, the one who gives but never gets thanked, the one whose story is always told by someone else, I want you to know something. Your voice matters. Your truth matters. You don't have to wait for permission to tell your own story. Some people won't believe you. Some people will choose the comfortable lie over the uncomfortable truth. But the ones who matter, the ones who deserve a place in your life, will listen. And even if no one else does, at least you'll finally hear yourself. That's worth more than 35 years of silence ever was. Courtney's story teaches us something that many of us learn too late in life. Silence is not the same as peace. When we stay quiet to keep the peace, we often sacrifice ourselves in the process. We become invisible in our own families, our own relationships, our own lives. And that invisibility creates space for others to tell our story, for us often in ways that serve them and hurt us. If there is one lesson to take from this story, it is this: you have the right to speak your truth even when it makes others uncomfortable. You have the right to set boundaries even with people you love. And you have the right to demand that the people in your life see you for who you really are, not the version someone else invented. Family should be built on trust and respect, not manipulation and silence. If someone in your life is rewriting your story, making you the villain when you have done nothing wrong, you do not have to accept that. You can choose to tell your own story. You can choose to be seen. It is never too late to reclaim your voice. Whether you are 35 like Courtney or 75, your truth still matters. The people who truly love you will listen, and the ones who refuse to see you clearly were never really seeing you at all. Thank you for listening to this story today. If it touched your heart or reminded you of your own experiences, I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below and share your thoughts. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? How did you find your voice? Your story might help someone else who is still searching for theirs. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Every subscription helps us continue bringing you stories that matter. Until next time, remember, your voice is worth hearing.